For Real News is sponsored by assholes like you, so pay up, motherfucker. Alright, everybody, for those of you that have watched the last installment, we're talking about the American left media, how it relates to America and how it relates to the world. And just as I made clear last time, I don't care if people can have an opinion where they believe in socialism, they can believe in their own perception that a more cooperative economy would be better. That's fine. I mean, we're all entitled to have our own ideas and whatever, because we do live in a country that protects the Bill of Rights, protects freedom of expression. At least we're supposed to. Maybe it doesn't get it right all the time, but what are you going to do? There hasn't been a perfect society yet in our world, and I don't think America is meant to be a perfect society. It's meant to be a society where people can just develop to their best potential. Whether that attains perfection or not, that's not really the goal. And we're going to move from the topic of last time, which is violent corruption, violent protest. We talked a little bit about gun control as well, talked about racism, talked about communism. We're going to move to the theater of what is political corruption. And for those of you that don't know, most of the world, they have a conception of corruption as being the use by politicians of their position of power in order to get personal gain. That's kind of like when we're talking about government corruption, that's kind of the way. There's also corporate corruption. There's all sorts of different spheres of employment and what corruption means over there. So intuitively, let's say in a capitalist country, corruption in the government is harmful to businesses, harmful to corporations, harmful to individuals, correct? Now, move over to some of these countries such as Romania and let's say Central Asia, where communism had been the system of government and economy for years and years. That state corruption is more of a problem. Why? Why? Very simply, because the means of production, the entire enterprise of the country is concentrated by a planned economy. The people at the top of this state structure would use their influence, would use their position within the party or within whatever ministry they're in. Let's say the Ministry of Housing, to use supplies to their own benefit. You know, maybe promote the interests of some of their own cronies. Sometimes they would sell some of these resources to the black market. That's the way it worked. And there was actually a system like that in the Soviet Union, where there were people who their entire talent was being able to find these corrupt officials and buy shit off of them, and basically open up the command economy, the Soviet economy, you know, take advantage of that and make money. And that's why the Russian mafia took over so soon after the fall of the Soviet Union, because who are the people who are best in place to take over from the state? It was the people who had the connections to the state that could they could snap up its resources. This was inevitable. Okay, the people in the state positions of power, they have this you know, nominal loyalty to the people, where they would say, yeah, we're going to serve the people, we're going to create an equal society and everything. They would say that on paper or when they would take their vows, but over the years, everybody wants a little something more, so that automatically they would become corrupt. And so in a certain sense, you have to understand how they became corrupt, or why that happened. It doesn't, maybe it doesn't excuse what they did, but it's understandable. So in this segment today, we're going to watch how the Real News and other left-wing news networks attempt to tackle the issue of corruption in countries that they find unfavorable, such as the United States and Israel as well. They do not like Israel. And in countries that supposedly they do like Brazil, at least Brazil as it was under President Lula and President Roussef, or Roussef. I think in Brazilian, I think in Portuguese it's Roussef. But if any Portuguese speakers out there, tell me how to pronounce it. I can only read and understand Portuguese. I can't really speak it. So we're going to go through it, and I want you to leave your comments and maybe some suggestions, and you know, enjoy. On May 18th, The Real News published this interview with David Whyte, a lecturer and researcher at Liverpool University. He does socio-legal studies and criminology, as shown in the graphic, but the majority of his material concerns the austerity measures currently being enacted by the UK government of Theresa May and her predecessor David Cameron. And this has become much more acute since, of course, Jeremy Corbyn has been elected as head of the Labour Party in the United Kingdom, and he's fought the May government over many of these issues. He's called for a more generous social spending policy, and this kind of came to a head last month with the Grenfell Tower crisis in London, where the anti-austerity activists are blaming government cutbacks on the fire that killed a few dozen people, and they're calling them basically austerity criminals. Okay, so the question comes up, is the UK government corrupt? Now, what a vague question, and they don't really narrow in on any level of government or any specific position or indeed any specific party. They just make the bald question, is the UK government corrupt? And notice how strange the answer is coming from Whyte.
In this country, I think we are affected quite deeply by a form of corruption that we don't normally regard in popular discussion as corruption, and that is collusive corruption. We have a high degree of collusion between the public and the private sector. We have a high degree of collusion actually within those sectors, which benefit institutions, which benefit organisations. They don't necessarily lead to individuals having a huge amount of money placed in their bank accounts, although that might happen. We don't tend to have bribery, so the corruption that is normally talked about in mainstream economic discourse is extortive corruption, where one individual will bribe another individual for private gain. If we think about collusive corruption, then it becomes much more complex and much more difficult to contemplate. But the revolving door and the speed at which the revolving door operates in this country now, we have to say there's a level of collusive corruption.
So what David Whyte does there is something that a lot of us do, you know, when we don't really want to give a real concrete answer. He uses a lot of weasel words. And one of the things that stuck out for me was his statement that in the UK we have a high degree of what I called collusive corruption. And by that, he tried to make the bridge between the private and the public sectors of the economy. Okay, so why do I find that to be a weasel word? Well, what's to a high degree? Where in the world do you have economy where the private and public sectors are not connected? It doesn't really happen, except, I mean, even in Switzerland, which is one of the more liberalized economic systems in the world. You have generally a high degree of cooperation between certain large corporations and firms and the government. And what about Germany, where you have entire towns like Wolfsburg that are basically appendages of a corporation like Volkswagen? And in this way, I think that David Whyte kind of sets the bar so high for these governments to avoid the taint of corruption that I would argue, how do you make the case that a government is not corrupt? I mean, who are they supposed to cooperate with? Only other state actors? Only with individuals? Only with nonprofit organizations? It's a very difficult standard to maintain.
The question of legality is another one. Very often, some of the things that we are told are not corrupt actually are illegal, but there is some discretion held within the authorities. So those tax sweetheart deals that we read a lot about, that HMRC are involved in, very often do involve some level of illegality, but the enforcement doesn't recognise that, and so there's a way of reaching a settlement with companies. If you look at the financial sector right now, actually fines of companies are going up quite significantly, but they very rarely reach the courts, or they very rarely reach any kind of judicial process. Conservatives going into this.
Okay, so in that previous segment, he's talking about whether something is illegal or legal. Now, again, he does not go into specific laws or actions such as, bribery or I would say nepotism is another example. He doesn't really go into that, which I think if you're really going to talk about this subject, I would say that you should take names and just spread them out. That would be fine with me. Maybe it is because of UK libel law or one of those issues over there that we don't necessarily have as bad as in America. Why can't we just acknowledge that certain companies in Britain, British Steel, I don't know if they're still around, by the way, but and in France, for example, you have Total, which is a massive oil conglomerate. They have huge influence in the French government. I would be fine if even somebody who, personally, I'm on the capitalist side. I have no problem talking about government corruption and collusion with corporations. Why is it that David Whyte is not willing to go and talk about that? Well, one of the reasons is because on legal grounds, he does not have a very concrete case, and he sort of goes and admits it. The fact is that he talks about all these fines that are being levied against corporations that are simply not collected. Now, why would that be? The simple fact is that in order for the government of any country to levy like a real punitive measure against a corporation, they do have to go through the courts, at least in the West. I mean, if you're talking about a country like Venezuela, they don't really need to go through the courts because the courts will just rubber stamp whatever the government wants. However, and this is important, the government, by going through the courts, they have to pay their own legal costs. It's a massive burden on the taxpayer, all the litigation, and we know that from our own experiences being Americans, that often the government takes up these legal cases that don't necessarily lead anywhere. So let's go see if Dave Whittle has anything more to say about such issues as ending corruption and whether the elections are rigged or whatever.
Well, I think bribery and election rigging are good examples of that kind of collusive corruption. We don't necessarily see the individuals that benefit, and maybe individuals don't benefit financially, but they may benefit because they're promoted or because their reputation is enhanced and so on. But I do think we have a very high tolerance of collusive corruption in this country, so that the breaches of electoral rules, for example, are not taken particularly seriously. And I think, the most recent example we have, where there are very, very serious previous questions about, a slightly different issue, not electoral fraud, but the funding of political parties, where you have HSBC apparently and allegedly being involved in laundering money that ends up in the Conservative Party's coffers, and a senior MP and also some senior journalists are asking why this isn't being discussed.
Okay, so let's discuss the matter that he's talking about. This is the UK's The Guardian from 2015, February 11th, 2015. It says HSBC files show Tories raised over £5 million from HSBC Swiss account holders. For those of you that are not from the UK or don't know anything about British politics, the Tories are the Conservative Party and their main opposition is the Labour Party. And it also says, subtitle, Labour too has received cash and loans from banks' clients, while leaked documents also reveal many donors with HSBC accounts had non-dom tax status. It says Conservative donors, peers, and a high-profile MP are listed among the wealthy who legally held accounts in Switzerland with HSBC's private bank for a wide variety of reasons. Their ranks include Zach Goldsmith, MP for Richmond Park, that's Member of Parliament, plus his brother, the financier Ben Goldsmith, which is not an illegal act, and a Swiss resident, German-born automobile heir Georg von Opel, who has donated six-figure sums in the past 2 years. So then it goes through these conservative politicians, which there's plenty of them, but it also says Labour donors who held Swiss accounts with HSBC include the steel magnate Suraj Paul and restaurant owner and clothing entrepreneur Richard Caring, who at various times is recorded to have donated to both Labour and the Conservatives. Von Opel, a major Tory donor named in the HSBC files, is a great-grandson of the German automotive entrepreneur Adam Opel. He has UK homes and a British wife, but told The Guardian he is a Swiss resident. And then it talks about how they're tax exiles and all of that, and they donate to the Conservatives. But you can go through and see that it says here, Edward Lee, who is on the board of Conservative Friends of Israel, has given some £85,000 to the Tories. Lee and his brothers were sons of the late Arnold Lee, a prominent London property developer who set up offshore trusts for them in the 1970s. But again, you can criticize these people for, accepting this money, but you can't call it an illegal act. And when they're donating to a campaign, it's the same argument that we do have here in the United States. It says here, even Swiss client Caring, owner of London Society venues, the Ivy and Annabels, loaned £2 million to Labour when the party was last in government before publicly switching his support. He has now made donations worth over £400,000 to the Tories. As a non-dom born to an American father, Caring lives in the UK but has to say for tax purposes that he will not reside in the country indefinitely. Caring, who banked up to £100 million in HSBC Suisse, had said he paid all his taxes on time. So, what comes out of this is that these activists, these Labour Party activists, they know that their own party has been tarred by the same campaign financing issues that the Conservatives have. However, they won't acknowledge that this is a broadly encompassing issue across the UK political spectrum, that you have foreign money influencing, or at least what you would call dark money from untaxed sources or tax havens. In the case of Switzerland, they want to make it seem like this is an issue of the Tories, the Conservatives. It just isn't. It's an issue that is a campaign financing debate, and to be honest, this is a debate that is totally okay for people to debate. You can say, I don't want corporate, and in fact, I have some of the same positions. I don't want lobbyists having undue influence over American policy. We have the same issue here with campaign financing reform. But they paint it as official corruption, which it is not. To say that somebody accepts a lot of money for campaign contributions, and therefore it influences their policy. It's a valid criticism, and it can stand on its own. Now, to call that official corruption, where somebody benefits directly from these funds, is a step towards the hyperbole, exaggeration, fudging the facts. That is the position that the Real News takes on a lot of these issues of corruption. And if you do not believe me that the standard seems to shift and get very hazy, you have to go beyond the UK. So we're going to leave right now the issue of the UK financing and go to a little country where you have football and the bossa nova. So where do the blinds blur for the Real News? Well, when you're talking about Latin America, one of the most historically corrupt regions of the world, where the left often talks about how right-leaning oligarchs and basically feudal lords are running the entire economy, they tend to get very defensive. I already did a video documenting how the left glosses over many of the problems that relate to the riots in Venezuela, the political violence, and comparing it to how they relate to it here in the United States. Now, let's listen to how they do it in Brazil.
Based in Brazil. Mike, thanks for joining us.
It's great to be here. Thanks, Sharman.
So, Mike,
the journalist that Sharmini Perez of The Real News introduced is Michael Fox, who happens to be an employee of Telesur English. Where have we seen Telesur before? Previous installment of the For Real News, we tackled the work of Telesur journalist Tabby Martin, somebody who has, if you see, she has a microphone that does not identify her media company. She goes out and claims to be an independent journalist covering the protests. But in reality, this is somebody who has bona fide sympathies with the Venezuelan government, so much so that she's often photographed not just at government supporting events like this one, but with actual leaders of the government like Vice President Diosdado Cabello. So why is the Real News turning towards journalists who are sympathizers with Bolivarian socialism, which is Venezuela's system of government, without telling the viewers up front about it? It could be that they're just trying to hide their own bias.
let's start with the charges and what Lula is convicted of, according to Judge Moro.
Right, so Judge Moro says that he is the owner of a beachfront apartment complex that received a very large amount of renovations, $1.2 million worth, from OAS, which is a civil engineering company that has been involved in the Petrobras scandal. And so they basically say that he was given this apartment complex and these upgrades were done for him as kickbacks in exchange for the OAS to receive contracts from the state oil company Petrobras. Now, they've never been able to show proof of this, concrete evidence saying that this was actually in his name. It is true that Lula and his wife went to this apartment complex and considered purchasing it, but they said that they never went ahead with that. And that's where this case is always really centered on. His lawyers, Lula, everyone on the left basically says, no, there's no way, you don't have proof, this is not in his name, it never has been, move on, he's innocent. And then those people on the right, and obviously in this case, Judge Sergio Moro has come out saying, no, he actually did receive this, this apartment complex, and he apparently got that information from plea bargain testimony and other things like that. So that's where this all centers around. And that's why people on the left, and that's why lawyers and whatnot, are kind of so up in arms about this and so upset about this, because there is no proof up until now.
Now, in previous coverage of...
So I do like the reporting by Michael Fox, even if he is from a different stream of politics and philosophy as I am. He does make a very calm and sober assessment of the issues. One of them is, can you prove that these apartments and the repairs done to them are done on behalf of President Lula da Silva? That's something that is a real legal question, and I'll be the first to admit that I think sometimes when we report not just about corruption, but about other issues of politics, people tend to lead with emotion instead of talking about legal issues and whether something is actually a crime or not. They try to make it an issue of morality or etiquette or what's the appropriate thing to do. The Don Jr. issue in America comes to mind. And that's really a problem when we're talking about it. So I like the way that he starts it off. However, let's dig a little deeper into what is actually going on with President Lula. Okay, so for this part of it, you're going to have to trust my understanding of the Portuguese language. So I'm going to post a link to the article that I'm going to put in, because I want to make it clear that I'm not just looking at Yankee imperialist American sources. This is from exame.oab at justiciabrazil.com, and here goes. It says, a conviction of ex-president Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva by Judge Sergio Moro to 9 years and 7 months of prison for money laundering and corruption regarding the case of the triplets in Guarujá, which I think is in Sao Paulo, has opened a new levy of uncertainties, of political and economic uncertainties. See, that's hard, you know. Those Latin languages, the words are a little out of order compared to ours. Will there be a conviction on the second pass? How will 2018 look? Where is the case going? Here are the 6 answers to this case. So then it goes, number 1, why was Lula convicted? So then it says Lula da Silva of the Partido Trabalhista, which is the Labor Party, was found on Wednesday to be the first ex-president of Brazil to be convicted of corruption. The federal judge Sergio Moro, who is responsible for the trials of Operation, I think, what was this called? I think it was Cashbox or something. Hold on. Operation Laundromat, I think it was, is the first occurrence in Curitiba, which is a province of Brazil, that considers Lula to be guilty of the crimes of corruption, of passive corruption. That's what it's called. I missed that word earlier. And money laundering that are attributed to him by the public ministry, the federal public ministry, in a case involving his triplex, which is, you know, as the name implies, a 3-level property in Guarujá, which is a beachfront area in Brazil. And it says, that was regarding the defendant OAS, which is a construction company, and repaired by the business for about 2.4 million reais. I think I heard that comes out to about $1.3 million in conversion. Through this process, or through this trial, in which Lula was sentenced to 9 years and 7 months in prison, the ex-president is under indictment for 4 other penal actions and is active under a denunciation of the Ministry of Public I think it's the Federal Public Ministry. I don't know what it is. I think that would be the equivalent of our Department of Justice. Still is being judged by Sergio Moro. So he's been convicted of 1, which is the passive corruption of the money laundering, okay? And there are apparently 4 more pending trials that are to be adjudicated by this judge, Sergio Moro. This sentence confirms that while ex-President Lula has issues of intimidation of justice or obstruction of justice, which is what we would call it, and of diverting funds or actually destruction of evidence, okay? And then there's another one that I can't translate. I'm kind of limited here. I'll post it if anybody from Brazil wants to volunteer. They can help me translate it. I would use Google Translate, but I don't trust it as much as just going through the whole document. However, it has been considered prudent to wait for the appeals court ruling, okay, I can understand that, before being condemned officially to prison or actually in prison. So there is an appeals process for him to go through. While in prison, okay, so they're saying that if he is in prison now, as the next president, the idea of imprisoning a next president, according to this article, would involve certain traumas that should be avoided if possible. So the Brazilian government is not going to imprison Mr. Lula until these processes are finalized in appeals court. Therefore, Lula will be able to present his appeal at liberty, as it says. This is me still reading, okay? And then the second question is, will the decision be upheld in the second trial or the appeal trial? So it says that this conviction is the first of its kind, which is under the 4th Region Federal Tribunal of Porto Alegre. I think that's in northern Brazil. It's unprecedented. It says ainda é uma incógnita, which I guess, and I'm butchering the Portuguese. I know some Spanish. I cannot speak Portuguese, so I apologize for anybody listening, because, you know, sorry to destroy your language. I'm no Pelé here. Of the 43 convictions by Sergio Moro that have been brought to court, 12 have been overturned. Okay, so there is a chance that Lula could be, his conviction could be overturned. So it's not as if Brazil has proceeded with a gross miscarriage of justice that is irreversible. However, you do have to give some credence to that. I mean, that's still less than 1/3 acquittal ratio. I mean, 12 out of 43, I think, is something like 28% or something. It's less than a third. We can all do math here. So, you know, leaving that aside, the Lula case, we're still talking about some issue here where what is the real problem here? How does a person who is for decades this leftist leader who did not have many tangible assets, suddenly there is a trial that connects him to beachfront property along the ocean? He serves as an executive or an advisor for Petrobras, which is that's the oil company, the state oil company of Brazil. And how does he end up having that property? He's the ex-president of his country. It's one of the many questions that we have here in America. How do these politicians, let's say Joseph Biden or Barack Obama, or Barack Obama, I mean, he has book deals. Obviously, he's going to make a lot of money off of them. But there's other presidents and ex-presidents and other rulers that it's sort of a mystery. How do they get all this money? how are they able to afford all of these luxuries? And therefore, the real question, and I think that the Real News did mention it, is can the apartment be really attributed to his name? And then that also becomes a real problem. If it cannot be attributed to his name, but it is shown and proven that he is using the apartment, then there is a money laundering issue. And we start to get into questions of, does the Brazilian justice system actually hold people accountable for things like money laundering or for, illegal favors to politicians, as has been done in the past. In the county I live in, we used to have and I'm not going to talk about what county it is, but we had a official that was convicted. One of his convictions was that he was arranging strippers in Las Vegas for a bunch of other officials and contractors. And he was distributing those favors in order to glad hand people. So that ended up being, and he protested loudly. He said, "Oh, this is ridiculous. How can anybody, everybody all the evidence is given by other people who have already been convicted, and they're ratting on me and whatever." Well, that's the way it works. That's how public corruption does not involve people going out in the open air and exchanging envelopes of cash, unless, of course, you're talking about Chinese officials and Hillary Clinton and Al Gore and what's that guy's name? Harold Ickes, who was their chief of staff. You rarely have this issue of complete quid pro quo with upfront, yeah, I'll give you this cash for this thing. It doesn't often happen. So that's why apparently in Brazil they have this crime called passive corruption, which, to be honest with you, that seems much more egregious than what David Whyte was talking about, which was this collusive corruption, which is something that, people can have a problem with it, but that's part of every system. So let's watch a little more about this issue with Brazil and how the Real News covers it.
News about this case, there was some talk of the judge or the prosecutor presenting some receipts that pointed to evidence that Lula and his wife had received some services towards this apartment. We're talking about an apartment, not a complex. Is that correct? And
it's a three-floor apartment, exactly.
Yeah, and there was some evidence of some receipts and so forth. Was any of that presented in court and presented to the public in terms of evidence?
Well, if that was the evidence, it has not been widely available insofar as people have it. It's concrete. We can see it. It's happened. That's why this case is so kind of exemplary about the complications of where we are right now. Lula, former president, has just been brought up. He's been convicted of corruption charges, but without that concrete evidence that is on a kind of a large scale that can convince everybody and say, okay, Lula did it. If that was the case, then okay, we can move on. People can say, okay, we understand that. But no, kind of what everybody has been really focusing on is saying, well, no, that evidence does not exist. It has not been concrete in this level. And that's why they think this is a really kind of political move from Judge Sergio Moro, that more than a legal move, this is a political push to try and tarnish Lula's image or stop him from running in the 2018 elections.
Right. And Mike, Lula's legal team has fought back, and as you say, they have already said that they're going to appeal this conviction, if it is a conviction. And two, they have indicated that this Judge Moro, who convicted former President Lula, is guilty of partisan politics, and that this whole conviction is politically motivated. Why are they saying that?
So Sergio Moro, and this isn't just his defense team, but this is widespread, and this is kind of another big debate that you have in Brazil, and how Brazil is very divided at this moment.
So let's talk about this for a second. We can't go and publicize. I always include the link to the full thing. So I'm not trying to be unfair to this Michael Fox. I think he actually gives fair coverage for the topic by presenting presenting some of his personal analysis, which is good, and I credit the Real News for that. But you have to contrast it with the way that they covered David Whyte over in England. First of all, this talking about a partisan judge. It's very difficult. Here, let me pull myself up back. How you guys doing again? It's very difficult to find judges that really are 100% biased. A lot of them have to kind of keep, in order to maintain the veneer of impartiality, they sort of have to abstain from making public statements on specific policies. And this is common throughout the Western world, where we have issues of judges that are, you know, nationally famous at a certain point, and they end up becoming, you know, within the legal world, they become controversial. You can talk about Justice Ginsburg over here, Justice Scalia, who is considered basically a gargoyle by the left, or Justice Rehnquist when he was on the Supreme Court. A lot of the Clintonistas considered him to be basically a cancer. But Rehnquist never really ruled on a controversial decision. In Brazil, we're talking about prosecution, so it is a sensitive topic. Can a judge who may have political leanings one way or another maintain impartiality given, okay, the trial of this world famous and indeed nationally symbolic figure of the political left? I want to go through one more thing here, which is that President Lula was apparently planning to run for re-election to come back to power as president of Brazil. Why do you think that he has the right to do that? Now, I'm not going to be one to weigh in on whether the Brazilians should allow him to do it or not. It's their country, it's their laws. Here in America, we have term limits for the presidency. But what happened with the Petrobras scandal, which started, the whole problem started because Lula's top lieutenant, Dilma Roussef, I think her name is Roussef, who became his successor, she was the top executive of Petrobras, and it all occurred under her watch. And therefore, he had the distinction of cultivating this person who set aside all of her record prior to being president and Petrobras executive, where Roussef may have been, you know, this guerrilla leader or a protest leader or whatever. That's irrelevant to the point here. This person presided over a disastrous period of Brazilian history. Now, under Lula, it wasn't as precipitously bad. He was able to keep the economy moving. He was not this person who did all these crazy appropriations and shock actions that, you know, the government of Hugo Chavez did in Venezuela. However, this is where I think he did become a problem. His own choice of appointments, similar to, you could say, Barack Obama, led to a deep culture of corruption, regardless of who committed it. So even if you want to say that President Lula is innocent of real culpable corruption, you know, real hardcore, you know, ham-fisted cash from one to the other corruption, which, you know, it could well be proven based on the other trials and actions that are against him that he did engage in them. You still have to admit that that's what has happened to the country. And forget for a second the corruption. Brazil has gone through a period of horrible economic retraction. And let me bring up a couple of figures. Okay, this comes from The Economist, which is not a pro-left paper, but they do have a lot of you know, accurate statistics. And it's called Brazil's Fall. It says, disaster looms for Latin America's biggest economy. So let me pull that up for you. It says here, at the start of 2016, Brazil should be in an exuberant mood. Rio de Janeiro is to host South America's first Olympic Games in August, giving Brazilians a chance to embark on what they do best, throwing a really spectacular party. Instead, Brazil faces political and economic disaster. On December 16th, Fitch became the second of the three biggest credit rating agencies to downgrade Brazil's debt to junk status. So they took one of the biggest economic engines in the developing world, and they ran it into the ground essentially by fucking up the credit. Days later, Joaquim Levy, the finance minister appointed by the president, Dilma Rousseff to stabilize the public finances, quit in despair after less than a year in the job. Brazil's economy is predicted to shrink by 2.5% to 3% in 2016, not much less than it did in 2015. Even oil-rich, sanction-racked Russia stands to do better. So they're like, let me pull up my camera again. That's an important distinction. Even now Venezuela does have a few countries that are, they're choking it off because they owe them money. Russia has bona fide sanctions due to political pressure by the international community. Brazil has no sanctions against it, and yet it has run itself into the ground, thanks in part to these ridiculous policies of Presidents Lula and Roussef that have basically turned the Garden of Eden into the gates of hell. So let's go back to the article. Even oil-rich, sanction-racked Russia stands to do better. At the same time, Brazil's governing coalition has been discredited by a gargantuan bribery scandal surrounding Petrobras, a state-controlled oil company, and Ms. Roussef, accused of hiding the size of the budget deficit, faces impeachment proceedings in Congress. She later was impeached. As the B in BRICS, Brazil is supposed to be in the vanguard of fast-growing emerging economies. Instead, it faces political dysfunction and perhaps a return to rampant corruption. Only hard choices can put Brazil back on course. Just now, Ms. Roussef does not seem to have the stomach for them. And then it says, dismal Dilma. Brazil's suffering like that of other emerging economies stems partly from the fall in global commodity prices. But Ms. Roussef and her left-wing Workers' Party have made a bad situation much worse. During her first term in 2011 to 14, she spent extravagantly and unwisely on higher pensions and unproductive tax breaks for favored industries. The fiscal deficit swelled from 2% of GDP in 2010 to 10% in 2015. Brazil's crisis managers do not have the luxury of waiting for better times to begin reform. At 70% of GDP, public debt is worryingly large for a middle-income country and rising fast. Because of high interest rates, the cost of servicing it is a crushing 7% of GDP. The central bank cannot easily use monetary policy to fight inflation, currently 10.5%, as higher rates risk destabilizing the public finances even more by adding to the interest bill. Brazil therefore has little choice but to raise taxes and cut spending. So that's basically, they're going through austerity right now. That's what they have to do because of, now this is an important point, they had a free spending progressive government and the government ran them into this massive debt. It says Mr. Levy had made a game attempt to renovate the building while putting out the fire. He trimmed discretionary spending by a record 70 billion reais, or $18 billion in 2015 and tightened eligibility for unemployment insurance, but it was not enough. The recession dragged down tax revenues. Ms. Roussef gave her finance minister only lukewarm support, and the PT was hostile towards him. The opposition, intent on ousting the president, was in no mood to cooperate. Although he was a senior treasury official during Roussef's disastrous first term, Nelson Barbosa may be able to accomplish more as finance minister. He has political support within the PT. He also has bargaining power. Okay, so it's going into a little of the inside baseball here. It says, if Brazil is to fill its promise, much more is needed. A typical manufacturing firm spends $2,600 hours a year complying with the country's ungainly tax code. The Latin American average is 356. Labor laws modeled on those of Mussolini make it expensive for firms to fire even incompetent employees. I hear the same thing about the European Union. And Brazil has shielded its firms from international competition. That's actually something that is a problem for us here in America with the Trump policies. That could be a reality too. That is one reason why among 41 countries whose performance was measured by the OECD, its manufacturing productivity is the fourth lowest. So this was obviously, now it goes on to say reckless Roussef, and And if Ms. Roussef fails to bring about change, most of Brazil's borrowing is in local currency, which makes default unlikely. Instead, the country may end up inflating away its debts. Brazil's achievement has been to lift tens of millions of people out of rag and flip-flop poverty. Recession will halt that, or even begin to reverse it. The hope is that Brazil, which has achieved hard-won economic and democratic stability, does not lapse once again into chronic mismanagement and turmoil. Okay, so what they go on to do is talk a little about some of the problems where they had, you know, some of the problems that they see with the trial. So let's see exactly how they react to, you know, evidence or not evidence against the Lula and his lieutenants.
Party, and so these ties has made him, you know, out to be quite a political actor. Another thing that just happened a few months ago was he released audio, kind of classified audio between Lula and Dilma, a whole conversation where they were, you know, discussing certain things. And a lot of people came out and said, well, look, a judge, if you're talking about a corruption case with the president and the former presidents of the country, you're not just going to release audio public, make it public. No, this is the type of thing we need to keep under wraps, and that's another sign of how kind of he's playing kind of partisan politics here and really pushing out his game. The other thing that they point to is the fact that he hasn't tried to investigate anyone within the PSDB party himself under this larger Lava Jato Petrobras corruption investigations. The PSDB has been largely exempt of getting kind of called into his court and exempt from these investigations. Now, he said that's because they haven't been a ruling party in the government over the last 10 years when these these corruption allegations came into place, and that's true. But they've also been completely tainted with corruption, and were they not involved? That's somebody else's opinion.
Okay, so Mike Fox, not a bad job, but I think he does kind of try to. He's trying to have both, eat the cake and have it too. That's kind of the problem, which is unfortunate because I think this is one of the better reporting jobs I've seen out of this outlet. If he is asking, he's asking for evidence against Lula, and then it leaks out that there is this audio tape of Lula and Roussef talking on the phone or whatever it is about a certain corrupt matter. Now he's complaining that it's been released. So you can either want the evidence or you cannot want the evidence. And that's really the standard that I think is the problem here. Do we believe that corrupt figures need to be held accountable? I think nobody's going to say out front, no, fuck it. They can steal whatever they want. They can rob people blind. They can run pipelines through people's yards and whatever. I think we've all got enough sense to at least publicly condemn it. If not, I mean, there's plenty of people that'll, they'll bold-faced lie and say, yeah, I'm against corruption, but then they engage in corruption. I think in this case, the Real News Network, they also featured this report, which I could get into, but it's a little too, like I said, I've said in multiple videos, I have Israeli bias, so I'm not going to call out the Real News necessarily. I could if somebody was to request, but they're talking about a weapons corruption scandal in Israel as well. Now, fair point here. Yes, the Israeli government should be subject to corruption statutes. However, let me put myself up here again. I'd like to point out that Israel, I think, is the first country, well, it's not the first country, but it's unlike the United States where we haven't had a president put in prison yet. But that could well change in the near future. And don't say which president. I mean, every guy's going to have a different answer. But Israel has convicted a prime minister. They've convicted a president of rape. They've convicted a defense minister of rape. It's a country where they do have accountability for public officials. Not for all public officials. Some of them skate by. And I think Netanyahu could find a way to skate by. However, It's funny that they use a corruption scandal that the Israelis are going through and adjudicating on their own without prompting by the international community. They're using that as a club to hit the Israelis. I mean, if they would have swept it under the rug, I would totally understand it. And that's where I defer here. You know, I'm perfectly fine with media outlets criticizing any given country, saying, you know, this is fucked up over there, over in Chile or Tibet or whatever it is. But if you're against public violence, as in the last video, you should be against it both in your country and probably in other countries. If you're against private ownership of guns, you should be against it in your country and in other countries. If you're against now, other things like religion, those are things that are fuzzy because those differ. Not every country has the same religion. So if you're against religious laws in the United States, but you're talking about a country like Mexico or Italy, which is deeply Catholic, then I feel that you kind of have to take a step back from that. But with public corruption, when in one country you complain that collusional corruption, okay, which is kind of this like dark and nebulous category that was invented by David Whyte over in England. You want to complain about that in one story, and then in another story where you have clear and present corruption among the ruling class of a socialist party, which is in Brazil. And then you complain, oh, what about the, I want to see the evidence. I want to see the evidence. Well, when it comes to collusional corruption, which isn't a real thing, you basically invent the crime so that you can have corruption for it. So you can't have it both ways. So I hope you guys enjoyed it. This is a little more of a boring story than, because we're talking about, you know, the law and whatnot. And none of us are, I mean, unless some of you in the audience are lawyers, that's not exactly the most interesting topic, but we do have to scrutinize all these outlets, because if you don't present your biases and you don't talk about how a crime is, you know, how it is a problem, you invent crimes for things that you do not like, things that you find undesirable, yet when in another country a crime is actually committed that's already on the books and that is you know, clearly a crime of corruption, then you're complaining that it's even being tried. Then I think that you have to admit that you're simply being completely partisan and you're supporting a side, and your prejudices are overtaking your own judgment. So with that, this is Ramon again for Bold Like a Leopard. And subscribe. Let me know what you thought of this topic. We're going to do a few more of these, but hopefully it's not going to be as long and legalistic.